Welcome to another deep dive. This time into a really cool idea, turning obstacles into advantages.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
We've got a really interesting mix of sources for this one. Biographies, historical accounts, even some
Bit
philosophy.
of everything.
But they all point to this concept that the obstacle is the way.
Yeah, I love that idea.
And we're going to explore the lives of some truly remarkable people who didn't just face challenges, but used them as fuel to achieve some really incredible things.
Should be fun.
Like, think Reuben Hurricane Carter, a boxer who maintained his inner freedom even while wrongly imprisoned for 19 years.
19 years.
Or Ulysses S. Grant, a Civil War general who was so persistent he even learned from all the ways not to capture Vicksburg.
Wow.
And then there's Samuel Zemurray, a banana tycoon who literally bought the same land twice just to outmaneuver a corporate giant.
That's amazing. I hadn't heard that one before.
So how does this whole obstacle is the way idea actually work?
Well, what's fascinating is that this isn't some, new age concept. It's a thread that runs through history, from ancient philosophers to modern-day entrepreneurs. What all these figures have in common is that they mastered three key disciplines: perception, action, and will.
Okay, let's unpack those disciplines, starting with perception. I'm struck by how Reuben Hurricane Carter's story really highlights the power of perception. Here's a man who was wrongly imprisoned for almost 2 decades, yet he refused to let his circumstances define him.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
He chose to focus on what he could control: his thoughts, his beliefs, his reactions.
Powerful stuff.
It's like he created freedom within his own mind despite his physical confinement.
Exactly. Carter understood a fundamental principle. We always retain control over our perceptions and choices.
So it's not about, like, pretending the situation isn't happening.
No, not at all. It's not about denying the reality of the situation, but about choosing how you respond to it.
Right. I see. I see. That makes me think of Ulysses S. Grant, who was known for his, unflappable demeanor even in the heat of battle.
Oh, yeah.
Like, imagine this. During one intense fight, shards of glass were falling from the ceiling all around him, potentially deadly, and the guy didn't even flinch. That's some next level emotional control.
Uh-huh. I can't even imagine.
Do you think that's something people are born with or can learn?
It's a great question. Actually, there's a fascinating parallel in how NASA trains astronauts to stay calm under immense pressure.
Oh, really?
They use a technique called graded exposure, where they gradually expose astronauts to every possible scenario over and over again until it becomes second nature.
So they're basically practicing for the worst case scenario so that when and if it actually happens, they're prepared.
Yeah, exactly. They can respond effectively without panicking.
So it's like building up a mental muscle for staying calm, even when things get chaotic.
You got it.
I love that idea. And it makes sense, right? If astronauts can train themselves to stay cool in life or death situations, we can certainly learn to manage our everyday anxieties.
For sure.
One of our sources had this great mantra: I am not going to die from this.
Oh, yeah, love that one.
It's such a simple reminder that most of our problems, while they might feel huge in the moment, are not actually life-threatening.
It helps put things into perspective.
So controlling our emotions is key, but how do we actually go about shifting our perspective when we're facing a challenge?
Hmm.
It's easy to say, think positive, but how do you actually do that when you're feeling stuck?
Oh, take George Clooney, for example.
Yeah,
Early in his career, he kept getting rejected at auditions,
I can only imagine.
which was incredibly demoralizing, I'm sure. But then he shifted his perspective.
Okay.
He realized that casting directors were also facing a challenge, finding the right actor for the role. So he started seeing himself as the solution to their problem.
Instead of feeling like he needed something from them, he flipped the script and positioned himself as an asset.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what the Stoics meant by focusing on what's in our control. We can't control whether we get the part, the job, the whatever, but we can control how we approach the situation, how we present ourselves, and how we choose to perceive the outcome.
It's like that old serenity prayer.
Oh, yeah.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
A great distillation of that Stoic philosophy. Think about Tommy John, a baseball pitcher who had a remarkably long career. He faced a career-ending injury but refused to get up.
Hmm.
He found a doctor willing to perform an experimental surgery with a 1 in 100 chance of success.
Wow.
That's what he chose to focus on, that tiny sliver of possibility. And it paid off. He went on to play for another 13 seasons.
Talk about defying the odds. It really makes you think about how often we might be limiting ourselves simply because we don't believe something is possible.
We get caught up in what we can't control, whether it's the economy, politics, or other people's opinions. But the Stoics remind us that we can always choose our attitude, our perspective, and our actions. And those choices are incredibly powerful.
So, we've talked about recognizing our power, steadying our nerves, controlling our emotions, practicing objectivity, and even shifting our perspective. But there's one more key element to mastering perception that we need to discuss. It might be the most counterintuitive of all: living in the present moment.
Living in the now.
Why is that so important?
Because that's where our power lies. It's in the now. Did you know that half of the Fortune 500 companies were started during recessions?
Really?
Think about that. Those entrepreneurs weren't focused on the doom and gloom. They were too busy solving problems and building their businesses.
They were just completely immersed in the present moment.
Exactly. Our minds are naturally prone to wander, getting caught up in anxieties about the past or the future, but the present moment is all we truly have.
And the Stoics believed that we can't control what's already happened or what might happen, but we can control what we do right now.
Right.
It reminds me of that Chuck Palahniuk quote. The trick to forgetting the big picture is to look at everything close up. When we zoom in on the present moment, the big, scary picture fades away, and we can just focus on taking that next step.
It's a practice, for sure, but it's a skill worth cultivating because when you're truly present, you're able to respond to challenges more effectively, to see opportunities that you might otherwise miss, and to tap into a level of creativity and clarity that's just not possible when your mind is cluttered with anxieties about the past or the future.
Okay, so living in the present moment is key. But what about those times when we need to think big, to really push the boundaries of what seems possible? How do we cultivate that kind of visionary thinking?
Well, you can't talk about visionary thinking without mentioning Steve Jobs.
Of course.
He was notorious for his reality distortion field. He truly believed that if you wanted to achieve something truly great, you had to be willing to bend reality to your will.
I think there's a famous quote where he said something like, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do."
Exactly. Jobs wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, to push the limits of what was considered possible. He saw obstacles not as roadblocks, but as opportunities to innovate.
Which reminds me of another great example, General Eisenhower and his response to the German Blitzkrieg.
Uh-huh.
At first, the Allies were completely intimidated by this new form of warfare, but Eisenhower had a brilliant realization. He saw the opportunity within the obstacle.
Interesting.
The Blitzkrieg, while incredibly aggressive, also carried its own inherent weakness.
I see where you're going with this.
So instead of trying to stop it head on, they let the Germans advance, then attacked from the sides, essentially using the Blitzkrieg's own momentum against it.
It's a classic example of turning a perceived weakness into a strength, and it highlights a powerful concept, adversarial growth, which is the idea that we can actually grow and become stronger through facing and overcoming adversity.
And there's also the idea of post-traumatic growth, where people who have experienced traumatic events often emerge from those experiences with a newfound sense of strength, resilience, and purpose.
Exactly. It's like that Nietzsche quote, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger."
It's not just a cliche, it's backed by science. So we've talked about how to shift our perception, how to stay calm under pressure, and even how to find the opportunity within the obstacle. But there's another side to this idea of the obstacle's the way that I find really intriguing. It's this concept of flipping the obstacle. Our sources talk about seeing through the negative, past its underside, and into its corollary, the positive.
I love that concept. It's about taking what appears to be a disadvantage and turning it into an advantage.
Exactly. So, for example, let's say someone is being rude or disrespectful to you.
Well, they might be underestimating you, which gives you a huge advantage.
Okay, I like that. What if someone is being conniving or deceitful?
Well, then you won't have to apologize when you make an example out of them.
Ooh, I like the way you think. All right, last one. What if someone is being critical of you or questioning your abilities?
That means you have lower expectations to exceed, which makes your success even sweeter.
That's a great point. It's like turning their negativity into fuel for your own motivation. So, we've covered a lot of ground here when it comes to perception. We've talked about the power of our mindset, the importance of emotional control, the need for objectivity, and the art of finding opportunity within obstacles. But there's another crucial element to turning obstacles into advantages.
When that is.
Taking action.
Right. It's not enough to just see the world differently. You have to act on those perceptions.
Because right action is what separates those who merely survive from those who thrive.
And it all starts with one simple but essential step.
Yeah.
Getting moving.
So we've talked about, shifting our perception, how we see things, how we think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to get that mindset right.
But you're right. It's not enough to just think differently.
No, we have to actually, get out there and do something.
Because real change happens when we actually, translate those insights into action.
Exactly. It's in the doing that we truly test our limits, learn from our mistakes, and ultimately achieve our goals.
And there's no better example of this than Demosthenes, the Athenian orator,
Oh, yeah. Amazing story.
who overcame a severe speech impediment
Could you imagine?
to become one of the greatest speakers in history.
Like a stutter so bad that people mocked him, but instead of letting that defeat him, he turned it into fuel for his ambition.
He practiced relentlessly, like filling his mouth with pebbles, reciting speeches into the wind, even shaving half his head to avoid distractions.
That's commitment.
Yeah, he clearly understood that action was the key to overcoming any obstacle, no matter how daunting.
It's a great example of what our sources call a bias towards action.
This inherent drive to get moving, to make things happen.
We see this same quality in, Amelia Earhart, for example,
Yeah.
who fearlessly pursued aviation in a time when women were actively discouraged from, such endeavors.
Right.
And then there's Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox,
Oh, yeah.
known for his, aggressive military tactics.
He had this famous saying, where Rommel is, there is the front.
It perfectly captures his relentless forward momentum, which kept his opponents constantly off balance.
So it's not just about taking any action, it's about being proactive, taking the initiative.
Boy, I got to keep pushing the boundary.
And once you get moving, you've got to keep going.
Absolutely. Persistence is everything.
Like, think about Ulysses S. Grant and his siege of Vicksburg during the Civil War.
Oh, yeah. Fix it.
He tried every tactic imaginable to capture this strategically vital city, but nothing seemed to work.
But he didn't give up.
No, he refused to give up.
Kept chipping away at the problem, experimenting with different approaches.
And eventually, he found a way through.
His relentless determination ultimately led to a decisive victory that, turned the tide of the war.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes genius is really just persistence in disguise.
Like Thomas Edison.
Oh yeah, thousands of filaments before finding one that worked for the light bulb.
And when asked about all those, quote, failures, he said, I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
He embraced the process, recognizing that each setback was actually a step closer to success.
And that's a crucial mindset for anyone facing obstacles.
It's not about getting it right the first time. It's about iterating, refining.
Constantly learning from your mistakes.
Which brings us to another key principle, minimum viable product, or MVP.
Oh, this is a big one in Silicon Valley.
Where the focus is on launching products quickly.
Getting them out into the world and then gathering feedback to make improvements.
It's about accepting that your first version won't be perfect.
But that's okay. Get it out there. See how people respond.
And then iterate based on that feedback.
It's about embracing failure as a feature, not a bug.
Recognizing that those early stumbles are actually opportunities for growth and refinement. And speaking of process, we can't forget Coach Nick Saban.
Oh yeah, the process.
And his legendary process philosophy.
Multiple national championships with that.
His approach is all about focusing on the immediate task at hand.
Doing it to the best of your ability, and then moving on to the next one step by step.
Breaking down big goals into smaller, manageable steps, right?
Right, and not getting distracted by the noise or the pressure.
Not letting the overwhelming nature of the ultimate objective get to you.
It's about staying present, staying focused, and executing the process with discipline and consistency.
And this mindset can be applied to, well, pretty much anything, really.
Running a marathon, building a business, tackling any complex challenge in your life.
It's about mastering the fundamentals, doing the work day in and day out.
And trusting that the results will follow.
And it's about taking pride in your work, no matter how, humble the task may seem.
For sure, for sure.
Remembering that even small actions can contribute to big achievements.
Think about Andrew Johnson and James Garfield.
Both future presidents of the United States.
Who started their careers in seemingly insignificant jobs.
Johnson was a tailor and Garfield was a janitor.
But they both approached their work with diligence and a commitment to excellence.
Understanding that every task, no matter how small, is an opportunity to learn and grow.
It's about developing a strong work ethic, cultivating a sense of responsibility,
Finding meaning and purpose in even the most mundane tasks.
Because, as Viktor Frankl so eloquently put it, our job is simply to answer well,
Answer well with our actions, with our effort.
with our unwavering commitment to doing our best, whatever that may look like in a given situation.
And sometimes answering well means being, well, flexible,
Adaptable.
willing to think outside the box.
Sometimes the right way is simply whatever works.
Even if it goes against conventional wisdom or the established rules.
Samuel Zemery, the banana tycoon who took on the mighty United Food Company, was a master of this pragmatic approach.
When he needed to acquire a piece of land for his business, he didn't let legal technicalities stand in his way.
He simply bought the land twice.
Twice.
Once from each of the two parties who were claiming ownership.
So he basically circumvented the dispute.
Secured what he needed to move forward.
He was laser focused on the outcome.
Not on adhering to some arbitrary rule book or getting bogged down in bureaucratic red tape.
And what about when his competitors bribed officials to pass a law preventing him from building a bridge across a river?
Oh yeah, crucial for his operations.
What did he do?
He found a workaround.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
He built two long piers that extended out into the river.
Almost touching.
Almost touching.
Clever.
And then he connected them with a temporary pontoon section.
So not technically a bridge,
Not according to the letter of the law.
but it serves the same purpose.
Allowed him to continue expanding his business.
That's a fantastic example of how creative problem solving and a willingness to challenge the status quo can turn obstacles into opportunities.
And sometimes the most effective path to action is through, indirect approaches.
Like leveraging your opponent's strengths against them.
Exactly.
Like George Washington's military strategy during the Revolutionary War.
Oh yeah, had to be smart against the British.
He knew he couldn't defeat the British in a direct confrontation, so he favored a strategy of, well, evasion, flanking maneuvers.
Surprise attack.
Often striking when and where the enemy least expected it.
He understood the power of leverage, of finding the enemy's weak points and exploiting them to his advantage.
Choosing your battles wisely.
Conserving your resources, not wasting energy on unnecessary confrontations.
Yeah, it's like using their own force against them, right?
Yeah,
Turning their strength into a weakness.
exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of action.
Mhm.
Sometimes the most powerful move is actually inaction.
Okay, now that sounds counterintuitive. How can not acting help us overcome obstacles?
Well, think about Gandhi's strategy of nonviolent resistance against the British Empire. By refusing to engage in violence, he exposed the brutality of the oppressors and ultimately won the moral high ground.
Or Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy of, meeting physical force with soul force.
Powerful stuff.
It's about recognizing that sometimes the most effective way to overcome an obstacle is to simply refuse to play by its rules.
It's like letting the obstacle's own momentum work against it. Almost like a judo move, where you use your opponent's weight to throw them off balance.
That makes sense. It reminds me of how, the Russians throughout history have used their vast territory to their advantage.
Oh yeah, classic example.
Luring invaders like Napoleon and the Nazis deep into their lands,
And then,
only to let the harsh winter decimate their armies.
exactly, or even something as simple as how Bucephalus, Alexander the Great's legendary horse, was tamed.
I don't know that one.
Most people tried to break him with force,
Mhm.
But Alexander observed that the horse was terrified of his own shadow. So he simply turned Bucephalus towards the sun
Let the horse run until it was exhausted.
and realized that his shadow wasn't a threat.
It was a brilliant example of overcoming an obstacle through, understanding and patience.
Not brute force.
Wow, those are some incredible examples. So we've talked about perception and action,
The first two disciplines.
but there's one final discipline that ties everything together, right?
Will. The foundation that allows us to stay the course even when things get tough.
So it's about more than just setting goals and taking action. It's about having that, inner strength to persevere, to push through those inevitable setbacks and keep moving forward.
Exactly. Will is what allows us to stay true to our values, to maintain our focus, and to overcome those voices of doubt and fear that inevitably arise when we're challenging ourselves to do something, difficult or different.
So how do we cultivate this kind of unwavering will? Is it something we're born with or something we can develop over time?
It's a bit of both, honestly. Some people seem to be naturally more resilient, more determined.
Right.
But the good news is that willpower, like any muscle, can be strengthened through practice and training.
So the more we use it, the stronger it becomes.
You got it. It's about developing resilience, grit, that ability to bounce back from setbacks and keep moving forward. And it's about cultivating a deep sense of purpose, a clear understanding of why you're doing what you're doing.
So that fuels your motivation and helps you stay focused on the long game?
Is exactly.
So, to recap, we've explored the three disciplines: perception, action, and will. And we've seen how they can be used to turn obstacles into advantages.
That was our mission.
But as you said, will is an ongoing journey, something we continue to develop throughout our lives.
It's a journey worth taking because the ability to face challenges with courage, resilience, and a sense of purpose is essential for living a fulfilling and meaningful life.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought for you to consider. What obstacle in your life might actually be your biggest advantage in disguise? Maybe it's a fear you need to overcome, a challenge you've been avoiding, or a setback that's been holding you back. Whatever it is, remember the three disciplines: perception, action, and will. Shift your perspective, take action, and cultivate that inner strength. You might be surprised by what you're capable of achieving. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep turning those obstacles into advantages.